Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I know some folks are still filing in from lunch, and hopefully more folks will join us as we get going here, and we've got folks joining us online today as well. Thanks to all of you for being in the room and joining this discussion today. Just for sake of introduction, I'm Brad Crowell. I'm one of the 5 commissioners at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we're going to talk about the NRC's Independent Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards. So let me just say that today's discussion, we're going to be charting a very similar theme to the overall theme of RIC this year, which is charting the next 50 years. And the role for ACRS as we move into the coming years and decades. As NRC Chairman Wright is fond of saying, we all have a role to play in meeting this important moment to enable the safe deployment of the next generation of commercial nuclear reactors, and the role of ACRS is no exception. I'm very honored to have such an esteemed panel of experts today, all of whom bring tremendous experience, insights, and history with both the NRC and engagement with ACRS. Before we begin, let me do a couple housekeeping items. Please remember to silence your phones and devices. The Q&A portion of the session will be through electronic means for both virtual and in-person attendees. For those in the room, you can scan the QR code displayed on the screen behind me to participate in the Q&A session. I will likely turn to those questions submitted by the audience after I kick off the panel with a few specific questions. And we'll be taking questions. I'll try to make sure I work in questions both from folks in the room and online. So with that, thank you all again for joining today. I'll kick off our discussion by introducing our panelists. First, we're honored to be joined today by Dr. Walt Kirchner, the current chair of ACRS. Dr. Kirchner brings more than 50 years of experience in the field of nuclear reactor systems and technologies and has been a member of the ACRS since 2016. He was elevated to chair of ACRS by his fellow committee members in 2024 and again this year for 2025. During his tenure as chair, Dr. Kirchner has taken critical steps to modernize and restructure the ACRS to effectively and efficiently provide an independent safety review of the next generation of advanced nuclear reactor technologies. We will also hear today from former NRC Chairman, Mr. Steve Burns. I'm certain Steve is a familiar face to many of you in the room today and to those joining virtually. Steve joined the NRC in 1978 as a staff attorney and ultimately served as the agency's general counsel. For context on Steve's depth of knowledge, he joined the NRC when I was 1 year old. After escape, it's your depth of experience, not your biological age, Steve. After escaping the NRC in 2012, Steve couldn't escape the gravitational pull of Rockville, Maryland, and found himself being selected by the President and confirmed by the Senate as an NRC commissioner, and ultimately as its chair from 2015 to 2017. Next, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Ed Lyman today on behalf of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Ed has long been an important voice on issues related to the safe use of nuclear power, the security of nuclear power plants, and non-proliferation issues. Ed, thank you for being here to offer your wisdom and insights on ACRS and its role in the licensing and regulatory process. And finally, Ms. Judy Greenwald, Executive Director of the Nuclear Innovation Alliance, rounds out our panel. Judy brings over 35 years of energy and environmental policy leadership experience in the public and nonprofit sectors. In all candor, I've known Judy for many years, but I don't think either one of us could have predicted being at this juncture on the stage together today. We spent some dog years at DOE together. NIA was founded in 2015 and has become a leading voice in the nuclear policy arena. And under Judy's leadership since 2020, NIA has distinguished itself by leveraging an informed, solution-oriented approach to nuclear advocacy. In my experience with NIA, they have consistently brought new ideas to the table, engaged constructively in two-way dialogue, and generally worked to move our shared goals forward in positive ways. So again, thank you to all of our panelists for being here in person today to participate in, I think, what will be a spirited discussion, regardless of whether you all ask questions, but I encourage you to add to the spice by submitting your questions. Today's discussion obviously comes at the back, with a backdrop of some very interesting developments in recent years and even in very recent weeks. And those recent developments impact both the NRC and the ACRS directly and in different ways. But they affect our statutory obligations and ensuring the safe application of commercial nuclear power. Let me just highlight a few of these recent developments that I think many of you are aware of, and you'll obviously identify others beyond what I mentioned. But in the recent weeks, we've had executive orders from the new administration declaring national energy emergency and on unleashing American energy. That is obviously has tangential relevance to the NRC's mission. Last year, in 2024, we saw passage of the Bipartisan Advance Act, which is now we are now working to comply with and implement. One of the taskings under the Advance Act was to update the NRC's mission statement, which we did earlier this year, and you may have seen Chairman Wright talk about and highlight this morning. And then, obviously, in the past few years, there's been a host of federal incentives included within major legislation like the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, intended to help maintain the safe operation of our current fleet of reactors and advancing the next generation of nuclear power applications. Many of these developments are a reflection of recent advances in nuclear reactor technologies, but it's equally important to note that they are also occurring at the same time as our domestic power demand is rapidly increasing, both in front of and behind the meter. Therefore, the need for enhancing our nation's energy security by establishing firm baseload and low-carbon power supplies grows on an almost daily basis. These dynamics and many other developments, both domestically and internationally, all have an impact on our conversation today. So with that in mind, let me first turn to ACRS Chair Kirchner to offer a quick 101 on the ACRS for those of you who may be less familiar with it. And Steve and Dr. Kirchner will talk about some of the recent changes he's made under his leadership. So thank you all again, and I will turn it over to Dr. Kirchner.
Thank you, Commissioner Crowell. I'm going to, as Commissioner Crowell said, give you a 101 on the Advisory Committee for Reactor Safeguards. But let me start by quickly saying that it's an honor for me to make this presentation on behalf of the committee. And it's an honor to serve on this committee. It has quite a distinguished history in the area of reactor safety and regulation. And I won't try and repeat that here, but I will highlight how we're making contributions today to advancing the mission of the agency. May I have the next slide? So, the chairman this morning I spoke at length about the mission statement. I think what I'll do is not repeat it for you here, but succinctly, this is probably the best definition of our role and responsibility to the Commission. And that is, we provide independent technical advice to the Commission on matters that concern safety and in support of the NRC's mission. Next slide, please. So our responsibilities trace back to the Atomic Energy Act. The committee was formed in 1947, and then there was a second committee on siting. The two were merged circa 1953, and our responsibilities are called out by statute in the Atomic Energy Act as amended. Primarily, we review and report to the Commission on safety studies and reactor facility license applications. And just to give you an example of what we're doing recently, we just completed last week a review of the VC Summer subsequent license renewal application. And we've got a couple coming up, Diablo Canyon and Perry, in the next several months. We are almost complete with our review of the new scale standard design approval application. Last year, we completed reviews of the construction permits for Kairos Hermes 1 and 2. And coming up, we're engaging now in the next couple of weeks into the TerraPower Natrium application, looking at a number of key topical reports that support their safety case. We also advise the Commission on hazards of proposed or existing facilities and the adequacy of reactor safety standards. Most notably, recently, we were engaged in reviewing the draft increased enrichment rule that's going out for public comment. Last year, we completed a review of the low-level waste siting rule, that's part 61. So we're quite engaged in those activities that are on the Commission's plate. There's a bullet here in the middle: upon request, review and advise on hazards of DOE nuclear facilities. And I can tell you that last summer we completed with the staff, they did an independent review. We did one as well of the next class of naval propulsion plants for the Columbia SSBN. That's a relationship with naval reactors that goes back to the Nautilus prototype in Idaho, circa 1952. And lastly, we report on the NRC's research program. We just finished that recently, and I can tell you that in conducting that review, we were impressed with the readiness, the capability, and the staff's competence to be in a position and position the agency for reviewing advanced reactor applications. Next slide, please. So the ACRS itself, we can consist of up to 15 members. We are appointed by the Commission. We are part-time special government employees. We have a diverse set of members. This is one of the challenges for the chair of the committee. The members are appointed, again, by the Commission. But what we're striving to do is make sure we have a diverse set of skills that are relevant to the applications and licensing matters that are on our plate and upcoming. And in doing that, we strive to work collegially and combine our talents and draw consensus recommendations and provide advice to the Commission that is well vetted technically and very timely in our letter reports. So I have a note here on the lower right of the slide that the ACRS only speaks through its published letter reports. That's our primary vehicle and mechanism to provide advice and recommendations to the Commission. We also meet with the Commission frequently. Our next meeting is coming up in June, and we will have more to present on steps we're taking to improve our efficiency in the reviews that we see coming our way. Next slide, please. So one of the things we're doing to really increase both of our effectiveness and our efficiency is being very selective and discriminating when we look at an application and the underlying supporting documentation. In particular, I'm referring to topical reports. What we're seeing more and more over the last 5 to 6 years is that applicants come to the agency often first with white papers. We, the committee, don't review the white papers per se. We are often aware of them. They often evolve into topical reports, and these are areas like source term, fuel qualification, coolants, materials that are often the underpinnings of what I call the safety case. So we're quite selective in how we go about this. We're looking primarily at those features that are novel or unique, or innovative interpretations of existing general design criteria, licensing basis events, how they classify SSCs, risk insights, and finally defense in depth. And like the agency, we're looking at early engagement, because if we identify issues or potential concerns, it's best done early in the process for all parties. And likewise, we engage in review of regulations. I mentioned earlier the increased enrichment rule. And again, there we're looking for clarity, certainty, and consistency in their future implementation. And I think this fits in with the mission statement where Chairman Wright was talking about earlier this morning, efficient and reliable licensing by the agency. Next slide. So just to quickly summarize here, the ACRS, in my opinion and observation, provides a forum where both the applicant and the staff come together and make the safety case. And we then provide an integrated perspective on this to the Commission, recommendations and advice. And likewise, the similar process takes place when we have meetings on things like increased enrichment rule. It's a forum for us to interact with the staff, the industry, and stakeholders, and hopefully improve the guidance and regulation that comes from that activity. So with that, in summary, I would just say that providing timely advice to the Commission in support of its mission is our primary focus. It's on safety. And with that, sir, I'll turn it back to you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Kirshner. Hopefully this is on and folks can hear me. If not, I'll stand back up at the podium. Let me start with addressing a question to former Chairman Burns. You know, given your long experience at the NRC and both as general counsel and as a commissioner, as chair, and then your time after the NRC, how have you seen ACRS evolve, and how do you see its role in the future in terms of what it should be doing, you know, differently, or the kinds of issues or skill sets it should be leveraging?
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. And I would say I think there is still an important role for the ACRS. We've touched on some of the historic origins of it, and one of the things just to digress a little bit is mention again the statutory. Basically, the statutory establishment of the ACRS dates back to 1958. It was sucked into the Price-Anderson Act along with the mandatory hearing, and one of the reasons for establishing it as a statutory advisory board is because for this, just like with some of the hearing process or review process of the Fermi 1 reactor, it was basically not publicly available, and this was one reason to establish it. And in fact, the reports of the ACRS were not provided to the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, which is, I find, almost unbelievable at the time. Thank you, Louis Strauss. And I've said that in respect to the mandatory hearing as well. But, you know, over the years, obviously, you have the transparency by other federal statutes, the Federal Advisory Committee Act and things like that. And in my own experience, you know, particularly as a commissioner, as a commissioner, my background is a legal background. That's true of not necessarily a legal background, but not necessarily a technical background for a lot of commissioners. And we've had some, I think, George Apostolakis, Forrest Remick. I'm not sure, I don't recall whether Nunzio Palladino was also a member of ACRS, but you've had a few. But what I find is, I found was that I thought the ACRS provided good information to the commission, whether it's through what I'll call the routine reports that were necessary, either on reactor licensing or in relationship to new regulation or new technical issues that might emerge. And so from that standpoint, I found it valuable. And I still think there's a value to that. We can talk about maybe later on is every application need to be reviewed, or are there ways to approach that? But I also appreciate what Dr. Kirshner said in terms of the ACRS looking at ways of managing its caseload, if you will, and focusing on the important issues.
Thank you, Steve. Let me turn to Ed and Judy, and whoever wants to go first amongst the two of you. How do you see, from your vantage point, the role of ACRS, and what would you like to see ACRS, look like or do differently as we head into this next, nuclear renaissance?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'd like to say that since I got involved and interested in nuclear safety and the workings of the NRC, I've been an avid follower to the extent I can of the work of the ACRS. Their workload is far too great for any mere mortal to take on in one. But the ACRS certainly over the years has impressed me with their ability to get to the hard questions, to ask the questions that I, as a member of the public, would love to be able to ask the staff and have asked the staff, but we're not entitled to an answer. But the good thing is the ACRS is. And I see their role as important today as ever, certainly consistent with the state of the nuclear industry when it was first stood up, the potential for a large number of unique new reactor applications of different designs, the issues regarding siting, the issues regarding defense in depth. These are all critically important. And I'd like to recall that what Edward Teller, who's the first chairman of the Reactor Safeguard Committee, famously said that it was about as popular and as necessary as a traffic cop, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's no longer a traffic cop because it can't write tickets, but what it can do is protest strongly, provide the best technical evidence to the decision makers who can write the tickets. And so I see that role, the ability to have independent, scientifically based advice is, again, more important than ever, especially today when my organization, many others, are concerned that science advising and the role of science in policymaking at the federal level is under grave threat. There's always going to be political pressure to make decisions that involve industries that have lots of money, that the fate of their industries could ride on regulatory decisions, and that is why it is critical that this independent scientific advice that is not dependent on the sausage making that the policy people engage in needs to be preserved and cherished.
Thank you, Ed. And I'll just highlight for folks that the not only NRC staff, but also the applicants appear before ACRS and get asked questions as well. And I assume you're as interested in that as the staff interactions. Judy, NIA's perspective?
Sure. So as most of you know, we have a big work stream on helping or advising or providing input to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on how they can become more efficient and effective. And this is sort of an overall focus for us. As I think everyone knows that we're nonprofit, nonpartisan, we have a public interest that we represent in making sure that the NRC is both effective and efficient, and that's something that we pursue through research, analysis, advocacy, et cetera. A key focus for us has been ACRS, but not by any means our only focus, but that is part of our overall research and analysis and advocacy efforts around helping the NRC to become more efficient. We've done a couple of reports that really delved in on ACRS. One was we published 2 years ago. It was called Improving the Effectiveness and Efficiency of the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards, and I was heartened to see one of the slides by Chairman who said that, yes, that's exactly what they're focused on. So we're very pleased that this is a big focus for them. And we think that they have made substantial improvements since the time of our report. I don't think only because of our report, but I think directionally we like a lot of the progress that's been made. I think our first key recommendation from that report is that ACRS should focus on novel and safety significant issues rather than every licensing action. And the committee does seem to be heading in that direction. We think that the ACRS is really important. I agree with what former Commissioner Burns said about that their role is critical. We don't think that, we think we still need an ACRS. We just think that their role has to evolve because times have changed. When ACRS was first created, pretty much everything they were working on was novel and new. And so the requirement that they review everything meant that most of what they were reviewing was novel and new. But the staff has matured greatly over the past several decades, and we've gotten good at, or at least a lot better at regulating and understanding issues that sort of come up over and over again. So keeping on doing the same thing over and over again, having an independent body also do that, makes less and less sense. So we're really pleased that they're focusing more on that. The other key recommendation we made is that they should optimize their processes, and they've made some progress on that. We would like to see more on that. A lot of people tell us things, and we observe processes as well. They do seem to still be having some scheduling issues, which can then impact the overall scheduling of licensing. Would love to see more on that. And as a reminder, the reason that we are in a hurry to make sure that we are licensing efficiently as well as effectively is that we think climate and energy security are urgent. And so it's not that you want to cut corners, you want to make sure things are safe, but you want to focus on what's safety significant and do it efficiently. And then our third recommendation was that ACRS members should have the right expertise, and we think that may require some evolution as the technologies evolve, as the issues evolve. Would like to hear more about how that's going. And then we also had a follow-on report. We talked a little bit about this in our initial report, but we also did a report last year on enabling high-volume licensing of advanced nuclear energy, and that covered several issues, including environmental reviews, mandatory hearings, as well as ACRS. And in the long run, we really are seeking a future where both the industry applicants and NRC get much more standardized. We don't think that can happen yet. We think now we're at the time for advanced nuclear energy, that there's a lot of early mover projects, and they are going to raise novel issues that the ACRS needs to be involved in efficiently, we think, but involved in. But that over time, a lot of this processes and the issues should get much more standardized. So we see a time when we should be able to do this licensing much more efficiently. But we don't want to confuse those two timescales. We think the early mover projects are going to require more attention, and then we'll learn from that, and then we'll be able to go much faster later.
Great. Thank you, Judy. As a currently sitting commissioner, I'll just note at a high level that many of the adaptations and improvements that ACRS is currently engaged in are ones that the commission itself can and should and is in many cases making to adapt to the current and future landscape of licensing advanced reactors. But let me turn to Dr. Kirshner to pick up on some of the things that Judy mentioned and just talk about how you've change some of the subcommittee structure, the expertise, diversity of expertise, and if you want, how you're differentiating between, first and first of a kind and nth of a kind issues.
Thank you. Let me go back to 6 or 7 years ago. We, the committee, were in the midst of the NewScale design certification review, and we made a decision as a committee that just following lockstep with the staff didn't make good sense. It wasn't a good use of the committee to just be checking the checkers. That's not our function. Rather to take a higher level view of cross-cutting safety issues. So what we did for the second phase of that DCA review, this is circa 2019, is we looked at cross-cutting areas. We identified 5 areas. I don't want to go into detail on NewScale here, but what we did is instead of just following lockstep on all 20-odd chapters of the final safety analysis report for that certification, we looked at 5 key cross-cutting safety areas that allowed us to take a top-down look instead of trying to lockstep again, replicate what the staff is doing. From there, looking forward, just recently with the Kairos review as well as the SHINE review, that was a radioisotope production facility that was fusion fission hybrid. We took a somewhat similar approach, and likewise with the Kairos Hermes 1 and 2 construction permit applications. So we do look at all the chapters that support the application, but our focus is really on the core of the application that supports the safety case. And if in the traditional way with the 19 chapters, that would be chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, 15, and 19, who's counting. But that's where most of the safety cases made in an application following the standard review plan format. And now with some of the advanced reactors that are taking the licensing modernization approach and NEI 1804, we're seeing something that is organized, if you're familiar with TCAP and RCAP, more on a functional safety basis. So we're looking primarily at the 3 critical safety functions, reactivity control, heat control, and the fission product radioisotope barriers, and maintaining those. So that becomes the heart of our review. That's where our focus is. And I think as we adapt, looking forward, we'll present something to the Commission in June that the whole committee stands behind. I'm getting a little ahead of where we are, at least on what's on paper now, but we are looking at how should I say, codifying that in terms of guidance for ourselves moving forward. So I think we will be much more effective and efficient in serving the Commission and taking that approach especially for the new advanced reactors. So that's one example I can point to as a way to optimize our time and effort in support of the Commission.
Thank you. Let me stick with you for one more question, and then I'll move down the panel here. How does ACRS resolve different views between the committee, the staff, the NRC staff, and/or the applicant? As to whether something is or isn't safety significant. I know sometimes there's a difference of opinion there. How are those things resolved and addressed?
On a case-by-case basis, I think there's no template that I know for resolving those. But, well, first of all, and this is intentional, our committee is rather diverse backgrounds. And this really contributes to the value of the committee because when we deliberate, we have strong individual opinions. I pointed to a view graph and a view graph earlier. We only speak through our letter reports, but getting to those letter reports is an interesting process. And it's reconciling strong, often strong, diverse opinions, and we obviously hear both from the staff and the applicant. So those weigh, as well as any public stakeholder comments, those weigh in our deliberations, and the challenge here is to, from that, not dilute and get to the lowest common denominator in terms of recommendations to the commission, but what are the key issues here? We are not a decision maker. We are not the designer. But we are in a position that when we see a concern, we can certainly flag that and bring it to the commission's attention. And perhaps that requires an iteration or two. And that happened during the committee's review of the new scale DCA. And there was quite in the midst, almost towards the end of the review, some substantial rework by the applicant, the staff, and the committee before we came to our final letter report on that DCA. So I don't have a template for resolving that. It's healthy, actually, but I think we do come back to you with a consensus, and if there are differing views, we have the option of members adding comments to our letters. And in fact, you will see that in the most recent letter coming your way on the increased enrichment, where we had additional comments by one of the members.
Thank you. Others want to weigh in on the safety versus non-safety significant dynamics or other things? Yeah, please, Ed.
Yeah, so first I'd like to say that I think the committee does a good job of doing that assessment itself. In fact, that's the appropriate thing for it to do. I don't think external forces should tell them a priori what is considered safety significant or what's a low safety significance. And again, because often things are missed. So I did want to provide a couple of recent examples where there were technical issues that the applicants had missed, that the staff had apparently missed or downplayed, and it was the ACRS who raised it that led to hopefully better designs in the end. One is the need for a supplemental boron injection for new scale in certain severe accident scenarios. This was something that the staff tried to downplay. The applicant ended up making some design changes for the first, for the original design, and then in their revised design, they actually had an additional system to address that problem. This may not have happened if it hadn't come to light through the ACRS. Another issue is with Kairos. The ACRS members, Dave Petty in particular, uncovered important information about corrosion processes that, again, the applicant and the staff hadn't known about, and that could actually have a significant impact on the longevity of that reactor. So again, I think these go to the, the importance of having that independent safety oversight and the ability to make independent judgments about things that may turn out to be very safety significant in the end.
Thanks, Ed. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Not required, but okay. And Steve, I'm going to come to you next. So could you talk a little bit from your experience, a little bit more in depth about how ACRS and even the commission should be approaching review and consideration of advanced reactor technologies? I mean, how is the task ahead or the mission ahead for ACRS and the commission different than it's been in the past? Is it substantively different? Is it process focused? What's the difference between where we've been and where we need to go?
It's an interesting question because, you know, a lot of our experience in up until the time, the time I first left the commission, we were still sort of dealing with, you know, if you will, the end of, even though, you know, you could say Vogel 3-4 and the summer AP 1000 plants were new technology, but you were basically, you had done for new plants, other than those, you were really done in the 1990s. You had Watts-Flower 2, which came back, was revived, and I forget, there probably was an ACRS review for that because for the operating license that didn't go into effect until around 2015 or something like that. So you had sort of a process that was there. There wasn't, I think, the pressure for, balancing the potential for a lot of things being put on the plate, as well as the differences in technologies and approaches that you had. So where I do see it is that there is a need to focus on, and as Dr. Kirchner said, on the significant, what's really significant from the safety issue. And this even touches, I think, on what Ed was saying. It's not just what's sort of thrown up to the ACRS from the staff. It's an intelligent, thoughtful way of looking at what the content is, where the important aspects of these technologies, to the extent they're considered, particularly new, quote, new, unquote, technologies, and how you address it there, but also recognizing that if you are going to be facing this challenge of multiple applications and a diverse set of technologies, as well as in terms of the ultimate numbers, that looking at how do we most efficiently get through that process. And I think that's something I think for the committee primarily to do. The commission can give guidance, but I think ultimately the commission, I think what the commission would want is, effective advice and counsel, if you will, from the advisory committee. That can be, to the extent that it's necessitated by the commission itself to put that in, or put that under consideration in its decision making. For example, if there's still the mandatory hearing, or even in even in the context of contested hearings, that the commission's able to do that. And also, but beyond the sort of formalities of a process, it's also, I think, it helps the commission's oversight and understanding of where the staff is and how the staff is going and how those things are proceeding. I think these may not match up completely, but I recall, for example, one of the sort of lessons learned out of the NewScale example was that there was a certain amount of churning between the applicant and staff over certain issues, and my example is you needed more of the Jacob's ladder where you're going up and down to make sure that those issues don't just spin around. And I think there sometimes the ACRS can help as well.
Steve, let me stick with you a little bit on that point. Is there anything is there a role for either the commission or senior NRC staff to help mitigate those dynamics you just mentioned, or to help improve the quality or sharpen the focus of what staff brings to ACRS for review?
Well, yeah, I think so. And as I say, going back just for a minute again to the NewScale example, the idea is getting it up to senior management if you needed to get it to the commission. And I recall there were a couple issues that did wind up going up to the commission itself for decision. You need that. I think you need that in the process, and that is primarily going to be staff, senior management, to make sure that those things don't just churn. Yeah.
I agree. Judy, you want to offer anything from the perspective of applicants and and their role and responsibility in helping ACRS do its job effectively and efficiently?
Yeah, as many of you know, this is a mantra for us that in order to have a successful licensing, you need both a good application and a good applicant as well as an effective and efficient NRC. So we really do think that the responsibility is on both sides for applicants to be making a good safety case, for them to be making the case about what is safety significant and not, and for them to be thinking ahead about what issues might come up, not just for the staff, but also for the ACRS. I do think that maybe I'll circle back on the applicant in a second, but I do think that I would love to see the ACRS, and this may be going on and we just haven't, we just don't know about it yet, to really think about, and I think with the commission, about whether they've got the right expertise or if they're looking ahead to make sure they're getting it. You know, similar to how the commission has spent a lot of time thinking about its staffing needs, and I know this is kind of an awkward time to be thinking about this with the wider world, but assuming sanity returns, you know, what kind of expertise does one need on the ACRS? How does it need to evolve over time? And how can the ACRS evolve to accommodate that? You know, one of the things we noted in our report, and I probably should have said at the beginning, the report wasn't just our opinions. We interviewed a lot of people who'd been on the industry side, on the ACRS side, on the staff side. And one of the things that we heard was that you really, the whole process, we have a lot of retirees on the ACRS, which makes sense, and I hope to be a retiree someday. But you know, the schedule and the way that we're thinking and the expertise may not be, I think you need that wisdom, but you also need some new expertise and energy. New issues come up, you know, whether it's AI or IT or, you know, all the various issues. These new technologies have interesting materials and fuels issues, and just making sure that we've got the right expertise, which, you know, some of which the committee can get through consulting, and just making sure that this committee and together with the commission is thinking ahead to what it's really going to need so that it's got the right expertise. And I think the industry applicants can help too. You know, if they can sort of, particularly through their early engagements with the NRC, they can sort of flag that what types of novel issues they're going to be having, and that helps the commission think about how to deploy, not only how to deploy its staff, but also how to deploy the committee.
Thanks, Judy. One thing I've learned during my time on the commission with respect to ACRS and its the diversity of its skill set is, yes, these are technically part-time jobs, but it is a pretty demanding part-time job, and therefore it often ends up being, you know, retirees or very, you know, senior folks in academia, because they have a little bit more flexibility to manage their schedule, and that's just a reality. That's one of the challenges in having some ACRS membership that's from an earlier or more current generation. I don't know how to say it without insulting somebody. But the use of contractors and contracts to get that information, you can still achieve it even if you don't have those people represented on the board. Is that fair, Walt?
Well, yes. I would say that on this is one of the challenges, and the chairman of the committee, I guess, takes the lead here, lead responsibility to ensure we have the skill set that we need. So we are looking ahead clearly at the applications and the technologies that they're using, and in trying to ensure that, yes, that we have the right skill set and match. I think one of the big challenges for the committee is we start usually with someone who is an expert in one particular area. My background is reactor design and thermal hydraulics. But once you're on the committee, you actually have to become a generalist because of the work that we have. And we're limited to 15. We currently are 11 right now. So each time that we go out with a solicitation, we have in mind a particular skill set. Like the last solicitation, we were looking specifically for someone with expertise in the seismic structural area. And we know that's a big area right now. When you look at some of the reactors' risk profile, the biggest contributor often is either fire or seismic. So that's clearly an area where we are actively going forward looking to fill that kind of expertise. But then once that person comes on the committee, that person just can't be in that silo. We have to translate them into becoming generalists so that we can lean on that skill set, and yet they can be a contributor across the board. And so after a couple of years on the committee, I'd like to say that all of us become generalists instead of specialists. And in that way, we're looking at what's coming our way, and we're filling our vacancies. And again, our biggest challenge is not term limits, it's recruiting. As Commissioner Crowell said, we advertise it as a part-time job, and it's limited to 130 days a year as a special government employee. Believe me, it's a much bigger commitment than that when you're on this committee. And we expect it of each other. So we're looking constantly at what are the right skills to bring on to complement our existing membership and anticipate what's coming next in terms of new designs, whether it's in the area of AI or seismic or whatever. Yeah.
Thanks, Walt, and hopefully we can get those new proposed ACRS members on board sooner rather than later, so we don't lose them. And Ed, I am going to turn to you next anyway. Feel free to chime in on whatever you want. I was going to ask you specifically about the skill set dynamics. So why don't you comment on that, and then I'm going to ask you to go in a different direction with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one area of expertise that I think may be lacking in the committee is someone with expertise in public health, radiation epidemiology, because ultimately, that what they're talking about is the impacts of ionizing radiation on health and the environment. And I feel sometimes like the committee is too heavily weighted in the kind of nuclear engineering view of public health and radiation. I think maybe broadening that perspective might help.
Okay. This is perhaps superficial, but I would also love to see more interest in ACRS and ACS members from west of the Mississippi. We're a little short. We're a little East Coast and New England heavy in terms of participation. I know there's lots of smart, capable folks out there in the rest of the country. Ed, let me ask you a question that you're welcome to just throw back at me to answer as well. How do you think about ACRS in the context of other big picture changes that are happening at the NRC, specifically the recent push to reconsider the necessity of mandatory uncontested hearings? And we've already taken steps to make that a little bit less burdensome, but I could say that there's one trend line could be that Congress does away with that in the near term. Can you talk about those dynamics from your perspective?
Sure. So with regards to the mandatory hearing, which we think is still an important requirement given the general inability of members of the public to marshal the resources for their own interventions. So mandatory hearings, I think, still provide an important aspect of reactor licensing. But in lieu of that, certainly what the ACRS does in their sometimes aggressive questioning of staff and applicants could partly fulfill that role in that not everything that the staff does or says, frankly, from an outsider perspective makes a whole lot of sense, and they deserve to be called on it and have to explain it in a formal context. And the ACRS in their public meetings could partly fulfill that role, not completely, I don't think, but that kind of aggressive interrogation of things that don't make sense, of things that might be not quite as clear as they're being presented, that have a history or uncertainties that aren't being exposed. That is something like the ACRS at its best does bring out. And I know in Judy's report, some of the people who were interviewed said that sometimes it was almost like a dissertation defense when you had academic ACRS members giving people presenting before them a pretty hard time. And, as a former academic myself, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but certainly if that is to be a substitute for the absence of a contested or, a mandatory hearing in a sort of contested format with cross-examination, et cetera, that kind of, dissertation defense style is probably essential to maintaining that level of, examination and bringing out the facts.
Okay.
So
I appreciate that insight, and I'll just to make sure I put myself on the hot seat as well. I'll answer it, and then I'll turn to Judy and Steve.
Yes, what do you think, Commissioner?
Well, thank you for the question, Ed. I am, generally inclined to rethink the mandatory uncontested hearing requirement. I think what we've done recently to minimize the administrative burden related to the mandatory hearings was a good thing, and I'm open to going even further, potentially removing the statutory requirement if Congress so decides that that's the wise thing to do. But if we do go down that path, we need to make sure we're creating new opportunities and perhaps more meaningful opportunities for the public to engage in the process. I've never loved the idea that an uncontested hearing was a primary opportunity for the public to engage. I think it should be done much earlier and in a much different context, and you'll have a better, more positive and constructive outcome. The public, I think, often feels like they've got their only opportunities to engage in the process are through interventions and litigation, and we need to flip that dynamic if we want to build the social license and public confidence that's really needed for operating a safe fleet. But if we do move in the direction of potentially eliminating mandatory hearings, I see the role of ACRS as having become even more important because they are the technical safety conscience backstop. The public should take heart in the fact that there's an advisory committee that is designed statutorily to be independent, is full of experts, and can provide an independent safety judgment on a given nuclear technology. It's just an incredibly important part of the social license and public confidence matrix. And so that's why I want Walt to succeed in his endeavors to modernize, so to speak, ACRS, because its role is even more important going forward, in my opinion. Judy, Steve, you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So as for the mandatory hearing, I've been advocating that it's time to relook at it. One of my colleagues out in the audience wrote an article with him about a year ago with Matt Bowen from Columbia. And again, as I alluded to the creation of the ACRS, the mandatory hearing was partly due in 1958 for the lack of transparency by the Atomic Energy Commission that basically did not provide the ACRS reviews, that did not provide certain things. The chair, Mr. Strauss, went to the groundbreaking of Fermi 1 and a number of other things. If you come now, this nearly 70 years later, or 65 years later, what you have with respect to that, you have an extraordinary amount of federal general administrative law that changed over that time, particularly in the early 1970s. So you have, the Freedom of Information Act, you have the Sunshine Act, you have the Federal Advisory Committee Act, among other things. And what that ensures, and those are just the statutory requirements that ensure the availability of information, subject to safeguards or proprietary information to the general public. You are not talking about getting rid of the contested hearing in the Atomic Energy Act. You have the environmental reviews, which has the engagements with respect to public comment and all. And what you've had since I joined the NRC in 1978, you have a much better approach to public engagement through public meetings, through local opportunities, things like that. None of that is going away. So if we're talking about the mandatory hearing, there's not a heck of a lot of value from my standpoint. That said, as I don't advocate for the removal of the ACRS. I think it still provides a valuable function. Again, because of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, its letters, its meetings are open and public. So that information is out there. I think the question we have for the ACRS is really the question of the first of a kind versus nth of a kind types of reviews. Right now, we're not there. Because as the chair said, we're looking at, different types of technologies that have come on their plate. Yes, I recognize my old joke, some of you know I'm a collector of nuclear postcards. And so my postcards go back to the 1950s, and I'm seeing the high temperature gas reactor, the molten salt reactor, the sodium cooled reactor, whatever. But I recognize we're in a new era with those technologies. And so having this advisory committee that can relate to that, I think is very important. The longer question is when you get to the nth of a kind, and I recognize the nth of a kind means are you deploying the same thing time after time? There may be some issues that come up with respect to siting, things like that. I don't begrudge or suggest the ACRS does not have a role in that, but it's something I think we need to keep thinking about. Thanks, Steve. Judy?
Yeah, so we agree, and we've written on this topic as well that it's not that you won't have a hearing if there's a contested issue, but if there's nothing contested, it's just not a good use of time. So I guess I disagree with the premise of your question that we've lost something there that we have to pick up with ACRS, because I think it will only, all of the issues can get resolved through the various forums and the way that NRC has to communicate. With respect to the ACRS itself, I think the issue about the aggressive questioning, there's sort of multiple parts to this. And this also, came from our interviewing and looking at transcripts. And basically, if the aggressive questioning is about a safety significant issue that has to be raised, that's one thing. But if the ACRS is focusing on things that just aren't as important, but forcing the staff to focus on things that aren't important, both in their prep, because we did hear a lot about how much time staff spent prepping for these meetings, and we would like to make sure that staff is spending time prepping on the stuff that's safety significant and not getting diverted. You know, we think of the NRC staff as well as the ACRS, frankly, as a precious resource. And we just want to make sure that both the staff and the ACRS and also the applicant are spending time on what really matters. And if you're spending time on things that are maybe interesting, which is, you know, I like to spend time on things that are interesting, but, you know, this is public resources, public expertise. You know, we need this, we need NRC to be at its best. We need this, we need nuclear energy. We need to make sure that we do this well and that we're keeping our eye on the ball. So I think it's not so much that the, at all, that the ACRS shouldn't really dig in where it's an important issue, particularly if it's an issue that somebody missed. That is their job. I agree with Ed on that. Probably didn't expect me to say that about anything. But I do think that it's really important that we use time well. And then getting back to the thing about retirees, I think it's relevant because I would love to see if there are ways we could structure the way ACRS does its business so that you could contribute without necessarily it being virtually a full-time job. And maybe that's about how many things happen in person versus what happens online, or maybe it's about how much is done in letter reports versus in meetings, and maybe it's just better mutual discussions between applicants, staff, and ACRS and the prep to make sure that the meetings are as efficient as possible, and so that we're not spending time, we're not wasting anybody's time. And I think some of this is some work that the committee's already done about, you know, making sure that subcommittee meetings and committee meetings aren't duplicative. I just think there's a lot that could be done sort of starting from the premise that the ACRS is valuable, the NRC is valuable, people's time is valuable. We have to focus on what's safety significant, and just designing our processes and making sure we have the right people in place so that we're getting the work done in a way that doesn't require us to basically, you know, underpay people for their time.
Thanks, Judy. I see Walt and maybe Ed vying for the microphone, so please go ahead.
A bunch of comments. We don't have time to do things that are interesting. We just do not. We have too much on our plate. So we spend a fair amount of our time, not so visible to all of you, in our planning, and we are pretty selective and discriminating in what topics we pick up. A typical application now for an advanced reactor may have anywhere from 12 to 18 topical reports. We don't have the wherewithal to do that. So we go right for those key reports that support the safety case, that are safety significant, and that's where we spend our time. We do look at the rest of the application, but basically we are becoming more and more focused. Just a few related comments here. Obviously, first of a kind is where I think the ACRS will be most valuable, its contributions for the industry and for the agency, and of course our customers, the Commission. A thorough scrub of the safety case for first of a kind in a public forum where we have both the design team, the applicant, and the staff in the same room, I think is a very healthy exercise, and I think it will make a strong contribution to the success of those advanced concepts. With regard to nth of a kind, we actually have experience now with nth of a kind. We, almost a decade ago, saw a large number of power uprates. You might remember some of the acronyms that were used, Mellow Plus and EPU and so on. Those were BWRs. We reviewed the first few through the system to look at methodology primarily and margins for safety. And after several of those, we made the conscious decision to not continue to just turn the crank and do repeats. So I expect with an nth of a kind, and also with license renewals and SLRs, we've taken a completely different approach. We are sensitive to the staff's time. So now our subcommittee that looks at a license renewal or a subsequent license renewal application really digs in offline, looks at the application and where they, the subcommittee, think the real aging issues are. We just recently did the VC Summer SLR, and we focused in on the EDGs, the emergency diesel generators, and the service water systems, because we saw some concerns there that have been addressed by the applicant. And so that we've come essentially with the subsequent license renewal process to doing something that's akin to an nth of a kind. And we've streamlined our reviews. So we only usually see the applicant once at a full committee meeting, and believe me, it's an all-hands-on-deck exercise. It's very interesting to see how the utilities approach that, how serious they are, and the staff. And they're both in front of us, as happened last week, and they were extremely well prepared to address our concerns. So I think the process works. It does give a good amount of that public visibility to questions that might arise concerning safety.
Thanks for that, Walt.
Yeah.
Let me ask this next question to anyone who wants to jump in on it. But are there opportunities in the pre-application phase that will help lay the groundwork for ACRS and to be more effective and efficient? Is that a ripe area for helping you do your work going forward?
I think so, and we've seen that already. So, for example, the advanced BWR, the BWR X300, we have already reviewed several key topical reports for that design. So we've had early engagement with the applicant and the staff on some of the key underpinnings of that concept. And I think that's helpful all around. If we identify concerns far better at that phase of the process than at the operating license stage.
Okay, thanks. Ed? Yeah.
Yes, but the problem there is, if you're talking about managing workload and efficiency, the problem is that there isn't necessarily efficiency in terms of the number of wannabe applicants who are approaching the NRC and saying that they want to have their designs licensed. And so I think some time ago there was more discipline in the NRC zone selectivity that it required. It was only going to, or was going to prioritize applications that really had a firm utility partner, had real financing behind them. Now we have, of course, a lot of talk and maybe not a lot of action. So you wouldn't want to saddle the ACRS with a lot of theoretical design reviews just because some venture capitalist put a few $1 million and they had the money to pay for it. That's not necessarily a good use of their time. So I think there has to be more selectivity in figuring out what is more real than not. So.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, pre-application engagement comes in many shapes and sizes, and certainly we'd want to focus on the more mature, realistic ones. One of the things I didn't mention in my opening remarks that is a more recent development is a number of licensees pursuing reactor restarts. How does ACRS play in, what is ACRS's role in that? It's not new technology, but it's a novel thing that we've never licensed before. Can anyone want to weigh in on how that fits into this broader conversation we're having?
Well, I would start by going back to license renewal and subsequent license renewal. For those 3 plants that are embarking on coming out of decommissioning and back to an operating status, I think that's the logical lens to look at it through. How well have they maintained the plant? What aging management programs are in place, what need to be put in place, and what plant improvements are being implemented to bring the plant to a status for going back to an operating status. For me, it looks very much, with some complications, admittedly, but it looks a lot like the license renewal, subsequent license renewal process.
Yeah. Does ACRS, either as a whole or a subcommittee, do site visits to either just keep abreast of certain developments or as part of their review of a licensing request?
Yes. So typically once a year, we will go out to one of the regions and combine a visit with to one of the operating plants with a visit to the region offices. And that gives us a chance to kick the tires and get a more tangible feel for the state of the physical plant, the plants themselves, and what the inspectors and what the regions are doing to ensure the continued safe operation of the plant. So that's an important part of our annual exercise. We're going up to Seabrook in April to conduct a field visit there and also meet with the region office people as well.
Thanks. There's a question from the audience that's been hanging in front of me for a while that I really want to ask, and I will, and my only hesitation is asking questions I don't know the answer to. But there's a question about the potential or use of AI in the ACRS process, or perhaps more broadly, maybe AI as a tool that the staff uses or applicants use that contribute to the product that ACRS reviews. What are the current pros and cons or worries and fears or hopes and dreams that y'all have about how AI can play a role here in a beneficial way?
I would start not at ACRS, but the research people in the agency. They have Chairman Wright mentioned it earlier this morning, a strategic plan there to look at AI and see how that would impact their work. I think we all see some obvious early applications. It's more machine learning than it is cognizant AI, but as a way to reinforce the inspection regime for piping and non-destructive examination of the plant's primary systems. This is an obvious candidate for AI-like techniques going forward. So we've been staying current and following what research is doing there, as well as on our own, we've brought some experts in to make presentations to the committee on more longer-term things. And there, I would say, what does it mean to use AI for more intelligent, cognizant kind of functions, going beyond just driverless cars to potential other applications.
Yeah, I know some of it all comes down to the quality of the input. So, others want to chime in on AI in any aspect? Judy?
Sure. I mean, AI can mean so many things, and there's so many different ways it might be used. I have recently heard of some interest in just using better search capabilities to find information that you might need. There is so much regulatory information, technology information, and if it's not, you never want, in my view, you never want to get too reliant on AI and get out ahead of what needing real experts to do their expert thing. But it could make it a lot easier for experts to do their jobs if it's used as a tool to find information, to find connections among information. And again, if it's used as a way to make things more efficient, but not sort of losing expert judgment, then I think it could be very interesting.
Yeah, and I'm speaking very out of school here and just off the cuff, but I also, Ed, I'll look at your face to see how you react to this, but I think some AI applications could also enhance public engagement and help, local groups or citizens groups or individual stakeholders, refine what they're looking for or their concerns. So I just think as a educational and informational tool, it could maybe help public participation. We may not be there yet, but do you have any thoughts on that, Ed, in terms of how AI can help the average everyday stakeholder?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that, just judging from how well the searches work now. As long as there has to be someone knowledgeable to actually interpret or decide what's hallucination and what isn't, I don't have much confidence in AI replacing the judgment and also just knowledge acquisition. I mean, again, you have to have a background to figure out what's likely to be true and what isn't at this point, because you don't have enough trust in what you're in the results that you're getting. So I think it's probably pretty premature to talk about that.
Okay. Let me take things in a different direction here with what time we have left, and maybe we can do a couple questions. But, correct me if I'm wrong, but ACRS has a role in looking at advanced fuels and fuel facilities as well. Is that correct? And can you describe your role there and anything currently on your plate?
Yes, so the committee has a history of looking at those kinds of facilities. Our interest now, we have a very competent staff, and NMSS and in the agency, there's the wherewithal, I think, to do a review of industrial facilities like fuel manufacturing facilities. Our interest is a little bit more focused on the product end. For example, there's a lot of interest in TRISO fuel, obviously, and it's a building block for a number of the advanced concepts. I can tell you personally, 40 years ago, I was doing small compact reactors, what we now call microreactors, for interesting applications like the North Warning System. And we were looking at using TRISO fuel in a heat pipe reactor, and we built a prototype for that. That required going out, at the time it was General Atomics, and we had a contract with them to make fuel. Making particle fuel is not easy. There's going to be a learning curve for anyone who ventures into setting up production lines to do that. So where I'm going with this, for the committee, yes, there's obviously criticality, safety, there's materials control and accountability, and all those issues. I think the agency can deal with that. What is really critical here is the product and meeting the spec that has been established, that EPRI put forward and the agency endorsed. That's going to be the real challenge, and I think it will take a while, even with microprocessors and much better ability to control things like coders than we had 40 years ago when I was buying this fuel. That's going to be a challenge. So our interest really is going to be in the product because it's just such a fundamental part of the safety case for several of those advanced reactors. And I think the same is true of other advanced fuel forms. So the fuel qualification is just one of those key essential building blocks in making the safety case for some of these advanced reactors.
Thanks, Walt. With just under 5 minutes here left to go, maybe we'll just turn and give each of you an opportunity to give some closing remarks or thoughts as you see fit. And Steve, if you're ready to do so, I'll start down on that end and we'll come and down towards me to wrap it up.
Sure, Commissioner. Actually, one thing, it would be a question, and the chair might be able to answer it, just so people understand the context, is we have the ACRS and the members, but there is a staff on, there is an executive director and there's a staff, and you might just explain what the size of that is. I think that just might be interesting information for some who don't know.
Yes, we have an executive director, Marissa Bailey, who's sitting here in the first row, and she has a support staff. I think we were about 18 people on your staff, divided between administrative and technical. So I see Alicia Bellinger there on the administrative side, and Larry Burkhart on the technical side. So their support is essential to our efficient operation because it is that staff that is the interface with the other parts of the agency, first in scheduling and then getting the necessary information, et cetera, that we need to conduct our subcommittee meetings and full committee meetings and then prepare our letter reports to the commission. So this is they are just invaluable. I thank you for your service and support of us. We're pretty demanding bunch of customers, aren't we? So yes, thank you for pointing that out, okay. Steve. It's part of being an efficient ACRS.
And that's one of the, I think, one of the advantages or one of the outcomes of ACRS being the statutory organization within the NRC to be able to do that, because I know I think often you have some other sort of ongoing advisory committees, but often there's sort of pop-ups or whatever, so you're doing the staff, and knowing that for the ACRS and its continuing role in terms of reactor safety and review of reactor licensing, I think that's very important. Again, I want to reemphasize I think the ACRS, and this is from my time as a legal counsel within the agency as well as a commissioner and chair, I think is very valuable. I think it continues what I think you've heard a lot today is, we have to, this is it's the old Protestant phrase, we need to be we are reformed but need to be always reforming. And that is, so I think you've heard a lot of those thoughts today. And one interesting thing as I was sort of preparing for this is I recalled an old law review article. It appeared in the William and Mary Law Review 51 years ago, 1974. And believe it or not, what's in there is legislation that would have basically eliminated the mandatory review by the ACRS of every new construction permit or license, had it much more discretionary. So I think it's very interesting that that's one of the questions that's on the table today. And I was not 1 year old, I was a junior in college at that time. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brad.
A very astute one, I might add. Judy.
I guess I wanted to end with some thanks because, we did have some critiques in our report, and we had a lot of recommendations, but I really do recognize genuine progress at the ACRS, and I'm really grateful for it to you, Chairman Kirshner, as well as your staff. I really do think that the focus on being more efficient is the critical step, and that you've already taken that step, and I do appreciate that you're continuing to improve. We do believe there are continued improvements that could be made, but we do recognize the progress that's been made, and we really appreciate it. And we also appreciate you, Commissioner Crowell, for just even having this session and for your attention that you have paid to this issue about making sure that the ACRS is able to do its job well. And we think that that's really significant as part of the whole effort of the commission to really making the agency work better. You know, we really do. I agree with what former Commissioner Burns said about the importance of ACRS. They still have an important role. We think that role has to evolve. We think it has started to evolve, and we would like to see more. But we really think this is a dialogue that happens between the commission and the ACRS, because they serve you, and really appreciate your efforts as well as the ACRS itself. So thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Ed?
Yeah, I'd like to second those thanks to you for holding this panel. Again, I think the ACRS remains critically important, that its independence and its scope be preserved, and there shouldn't be any external influences telling them what it should or shouldn't review. In that light, I want to throw out one other, not that I want to increase the workload, but I'm concerned that the Commission's interpretation that security, by and large, is not appropriate for their review, that is challenged by sort of recent actions where security and safety are more closely linked. For instance, in the limited scope security rule that Chairman Wright mentioned this morning, which has a pretty strong safety component, yet that was not reviewed by the ACRS because of this idea that somehow security is outside their purview, and I think that needs to be reconsidered. So just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thanks for highlighting that, Ed. And Walt, I think I'm going to cut us off because we're over time, and I want to keep people on their schedules. But thank you all for joining today. I tell you, in the execution of my job, I couldn't do it without the value that ACRS adds. But it's still incredibly important to me that you're adding value in a contemporary and efficient way, which will be to the benefit of us all. And this is a conversation that should continue, and engagement that should continue. And thank you all for listening and submitting questions today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thanks. Appreciate it.